Hi guys, Jamie here from JB Motion. As you can see, I am trapped inside a futuristic user interface, or a fictional user interface, or an FUI. So there's a few terms for what this is. We're going to be looking at how we can create it inside in Cinema 4D. We're going to render out an image sequence, and then we're going to import that into After Effects and add the finishing touches to give us the video that you're looking at right now. So let's get started on this. Here we go. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is create a tube, and we want to set our orientation here to +Z. We're going to set the inner radius of this to be 195 and the height set to 1. Rotation segments set to 50. Now, if you haven't done so already, which you probably haven't, press NB in your keyboard to show lines. And we want to go to our slice tab and turn on slice and set this from parameter here to be 90 degrees. Now let's go to Mograph and add a cloner. And let's make this tube object a child of that cloner. Now we'll go into our cloner object and we're going to set the count here to 10. And we're going to set the distance on the y-axis to 0. So now we have no distance between each of our clones, but we do want some. So to achieve that with our cloner object selected, we're going to go to Mograph effector and we're going to add a step effector. So now we're getting some distance between each of our clones, but they're inconsistent. The gaps are inconsistent. So to add a bit of consistency, we're going to go to our step effector, and in the effector tab, select the first point here in the spline graph and hold down Control to select the second one. Now they're both selected. Press L on your keyboard to set the interpolation here to linear. So now the gaps are a lot more consistent between each of our clones. Now, with that set up, what we want to do is create some animation. So we're going to go to our step effector, and in the parameter tab, we're going to turn on rotation. And what we're going to be looking at here is banking. So if I just mess around with this, you can see that that is going to give us a really cool effect. So let's set our initial value here to be 800 degrees. And let's make sure we're on frame 0. And we're going to add a keyframe there. Now let's increase our frame range to 360 frames and let's drag that out to meet it. Go to frame 180, which is the halfway mark. And let's set this banking back to 0. And add another keyframe. Now let's go to our very last frame and set it back to 800. And then add another keyframe on that. So that's going to loop. It's going to go here to frame 180. It's going to reach 0 degrees. It's going to go to the last frame and it's going to go back to 800, and that's going to loop over, which is what we're looking for. We're looking for a loop on this. Okay, so not only do we want to animate the rotation of our step effector, we also want to rotate the rotation of our tube. So let's just turn off our step effector for 1 minute. Let's take our tube out of our cloner and go into our coordinates tab here in our tube. Now we want to rotate this like so. So initially we're going to set it to 0. We're going to go back to frame 0 and we're going to add a keyframe. Go to frame 180 and set this to 2500 degrees, add a keyframe, and then go to the last frame and set it back to 0 again. Now let's make the tube. So first of all, let's just press play on that. You can see that that's going to rotate around. It's going to go to frame 180 and then it's going to rotate all the way back again to 0 at frame 360. So if we add the tube as a child of the cloner, you're going to see that we're actually losing our animation. So to fix that, what we want to do is select our tube, hold down Alt, and then select a kinect object. And that didn't work, so let's try that again. Let's pause it. With our tube selected, hold down Alt and then select Kinect. Now that's automatically going to add the tube as a child of the Kinect, and if we press play, you'll see that that's fixed our issue that we had with regards to our animation not working. Cool, so now let's turn back on our step effector and you can see that we're getting a really cool effect. Okay, so what I want to do now is to grab all of these objects and hold down Control and drag to duplicate each and every one of them. So now we have 2 cloners, we have 2 step effectors, and what I want to do is I want to click on cloner.1, go into the effectors tab, and as you can see it's utilizing the step object, which is this one. Now we don't want it to utilize this step object, we want it to utilize this one. So back into the new cloner, cloner.1, and in the effectors tab we're just going to drag this, click and drag this step 1 down, and then let's delete off the old one. So now we have 2 cloners and we have 2 step effectors, and each of the cloners are utilizing different step effectors. So now let's click on step 1 and we can set the scale here to 2. So that's given us a really nice effect. Now to make it even nicer, what I want to do is click on step.1, go into the parameter tab, set the time offset here to be 30 frames. So that's going to offset the animation by 30 frames. So it's going to give us an even nicer result. But what's going to happen is when it gets to about here, you're going to see our loop is killed. See that jump? So to fix that, we need to increase our frame range by 30 frames. So let's do that. You can just go plus 30, hit enter, and let's drag that out. So now if we hit play, you'll see that it will get to frame 360 and beyond, and you're not going to get any jump. It's just going to loop over. Okay, cool. So the next thing we are going to do is create a sphere. That's going to be in the center of our scene. Let's increase the scale here. So our sphere is going to be set to a radius of 135 centimeters. And with our sphere selected, hold down Alt and let's create an atom array. Holding down Alt is going to automatically add our sphere as a child of the atom array. And with the atom array object selected, let's first of all turn on our interactive render region. And let's create a new material. Turn off color and reflectance. We're just going to be dealing with luminance here. Go to HSV if you haven't already got it selected, and let's go for a nice orange color on that. Let's add it to our atom array. And so we can't really see the spheres, we can just see the cylinders. So go into your atom array object and let's reduce the radius of the cylinders to about 0.5, and the radius of the spheres we can go 3 centimeters on that. Let's go into our sphere and set the type to hexahedron. So that's going to distribute our spheres more evenly. Okay, so let's zoom out a bit. So I want to increase the size of the spheres in the atom array to 5 and increase the size of the cylinders to 1. Okay, so that's a bit better. So now that we have all of that set up, we want to create the next element of our FUI, as it's called, our FUI, Futuristic User Interface, or Fictional User Interface, as it's also called. So we're going to, let's just pause this, turn off our interactive render region, and we're going to create another tube. Again, we're going to set the orientation to +Z, and I'm going to drag out the outer radius to about 800 centimeters, and the inner radius I'm going to set to about 700 centimeters. I'm actually going to go 900 on the outer and 800 on the inner. And I want to increase the rotation segments here to about 50, or maybe we'll go a bit higher, we'll go 80 for the rotation segments. And I want to add some cap segments also, so I'm going to type in 3 and hit enter on that. Now I want to add an atom array again to our tube, so with our tube selected, hold down Alt and then select atom array. Again, it'll automatically make the tube a child of the atom array. So let's turn on our interactive render region again. Alt R is the shortcut for that. And let's add our material to this atom array. So we need to increase the sphere radius here, or maybe we can just reduce the cylinder radius. I'm going to go 0.4, and yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. So the cylinder radius is 0.4 and the sphere radius is set to 5. And the next thing we want to do to get these spheres and I'm going to call them nodes. We're going to get them animated. So we're going to create a displacer. What do we call these again? Deformer. That's right. So we're going to create a displacer deformer. So hold down left click over this bend deformer, and then you can just go and hover over the displacer and let go. That'll create a displacer deformer. I have 2. I just want 1. I'm going to make this a child of the tube. I'm going to go down to my shading tab and click on this little triangle and add some noise. And now I'm going to click into my noise and I'm going to set the animation speed here to 1. So let's hit play on that. So you can see that we have some, well, you can barely see, but we do have a bit of movement going on here. So it's hard to see, but what we can do is go to our displacer object, go to object, the object tab, and let's increase the height here. So we're increasing the height to about 200 centimeters, and now our displacement is a lot more obvious. Now I just want the displacement to occur around this area, and I want this area to remain still. So to do that, we're going to use fall off. With your displacer object selected, go into your fall off tab and let's create a spherical field. Now with that selected, let's move it over to the right and let's increase the scale of it by clicking and dragging by about 1500%. So now you can see that our displacer object is only having an effect on the area of our tube that the spherical field is touching. So I want to increase the size of that even more. So we're just getting some animation along this area of our tube, and this area is remaining still. It's moving, but it's not moving as much as this area here where our spherical field is touching. So I want to make our spherical field invisible in our viewport by just double clicking on this top circle here. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to pause this, go back to frame 0, turn off our interactive render region, and we're going to go into our tube object and go to our slice tab, turn this on, and let's set this to minus 180 degrees, or just 180 degrees. And we're going to add a keyframe right about there. We're going to go forward 90 frames. So you can just type in plus 90 here, hit enter. That'll bring your cursor here forward 90 frames. And we're going to just go minus 180 on that and add another keyframe. So now if we watch that out, you can see what's going on. So our atom arrays, the tube is being animated so that the slice folds over like that. So that's pretty cool. And we also want to do the same at the end. So go to your last frame and let's go minus 90. Hit enter and let's create a keyframe there. And go to your very last frame and let's set this to 180 and add another keyframe. So now it slices in, it does its thing, and then it slices back out. Now we also want to rotate our tube. So we want to create an animation for the rotation of our tube. So with your tube selected, go into your coordinates tab and let's add a keyframe here on banking. Now let's go ahead 90 frames and we're going to rotate this to about minus 360 degrees. We're going to add another keyframe. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, so that's looking pretty cool. And we want to do the same for the out part as well. So if we go to the last frame, type in minus 90 here, that'll go back to frame 300. Create a keyframe, go to your last frame, set this to 0, and then add a keyframe. So if we watch that now, that's the effect we're going for. Now you can see when it's kind of slicing in, the displacer is going a bit crazy. It's very jittery. So we want to turn down the strength of our displacer here. So on frame 0, click on your displacer object and let's go into the object tab and let's set the strength here to 0. Add a keyframe. Let's play that. Once it gets to frame, let's say we'll go for frame 90. We're going to add another keyframe. Go forward 15 frames and let's set this to 100 and add a keyframe there. So now it's going to rotate in. There's going to be no displacement and then it's going to go boom and it's going to start animating. And we want to do the same for the end also. So go to your last frame. Set this to minus, let's see, 105. That's going to bring us to frame 285. We're going to set a keyframe here. And we're going to go forward 15 frames. And we're going to set this strength to 0 again and add a keyframe. So now let's watch what that's doing for us. Okay, so that is looking pretty cool so far. So let's move on. Next thing we're going to do is create a cube, and we're going to set the dimensions of this to be about 7 on the X, 5 on the Y, and 5 on the Z. So hit S on your keyboard. With your cube selected, hit S on your keyboard. So that will zoom into the selected object. And let's maybe make it a bit longer here on the X to about, we'll say, 11. Okay, so we want to clone this cube. So let's create a cloner. And let's put the cube here as a child of the cloner. Go into your cloner object, into your object tab, and set the mode to radial. And let's increase the radius here to about 695 centimeters. And let's increase the count to about 180. So we got 180 cubes all cloned around in a circle. Now we want these cubes to also be animated. I'm just turning off my grid. So we want to animate these cubes. So to do that, with your cloner object selected, go into Mograph, go to Effector, and let's select a random effector. Now that's going to randomize the position of our clones. So if we go into our random effector, go into the parameter tab, you can see that it's randomizing the position of the clones 50 and 50 and 50 along the X, Y, and Z axes. So we want to animate these. We want these to move around. In your random effector, go to the effector tab, set the random mode here to noise. So now we're getting some animation. Let's turn down the scale of that. And we can also go into our parameter tab and let's increase the distance of our randomness to about 120 on the Y, and we'll go 120 on the Z also. And I want to increase the size of our cubes. Actually, I don't. I'm leaving it like that. I'm going to add our material onto our cloner for our cubes. Let's turn on our interactive render region, Alt R to do so. And let's pause it to see what we got. So we need to add our material also to our objects that we created at the start. I'm just going to group those by selecting all of them here, hitting Alt G, and then I'm going to rename this to center objects. And I'm going to add our material here. I'm just holding down Control and I'm just clicking and dragging to duplicate that material. Didn't work. Holding down Control again. There we go. Okay. Okay, so we have a good chunk of our animation done and dusted. We have a couple of more things that I want to do. So one of them being I want to straighten out our cubes. I want to make a straight line out of these at a certain point. So we're going to go to frame. Let's see. We'll go to frame 100. And select your random effector. Go into the effector tab and add a keyframe on strength. Go forward 20 frames. Just type in +20. And now we're going to set the strength here to 0 and add a keyframe. Now you can see that that's creating a straight line here. So all of our cubes are in line. So now our animation is going to kick off. Our cubes here are all moving around randomly. And then suddenly they're just going to go zoom, and they're a straight line. They're going to remain straight until about frame 180. We're going to set another keyframe. We're going to go forward 15 frames and we're going to set it back to 100 and add a keyframe. And what we can do is we can grab our cloner and we can duplicate that by holding down Control and just clicking and dragging. Just bringing my random effector up to the top to keep everything organized. And with my new cloner object selected, I'm going to increase the size of it here. So I'm going to select my scale object. It's going to drag it out so it's kind of in line with our outer tube. And let's hit play on that. See what we got. Okay. So we got a pretty interesting animation going on here. Last thing I want to do is, well, last two things is I want to animate this center sphere here. So I'm going to select our sphere, go into coordinates, and I'm going to go back to our first frame, add a keyframe here on, not on banking, we want it on heading. Add a keyframe on heading, and let's go to the last frame. And we're going to set this to 360 degrees, add another keyframe. And we want to make sure that this doesn't have any ease in, ease out. So press Shift F3 on your keyboard to open up your dope sheet. And with your sphere selected, just hit L on your keyboard or click on the linear button here, and that'll set the selected keys to linear interpolation. So now our sphere is rotating. We got this node thingy rocking. We got our center objects doing their thing, and we got our cube clones dancing around the place. So it's looking really cool. There's one more thing we have to do. And we're going to do it really quickly because we're pushing on half an hour on this, so I want to get this done. So we're going to create, let's just turn off our interactive render region. We're going to create another tube. Let's set the orientation again on this to +Z, and let's increase the outer radius here to about 970 centimeters, and the inner radius is going to be about 740 centimeters. Let's increase the rotation segments on that to 50, and let's go into our slice tab, turn on slice, and then we're going to bring this from up to about 90 degrees. So once that's done, we want to go back into our object tab and set the height here to 1. Let's go into our coordinates and bring it back along the z-axis to about here. So 160 centimeters on the z. Now once that's done, we can select our tube and we're going to animate this along the banking also. So go back to frame 0, add a keyframe here on banking, go to your last frame and set the banking to 360 degrees and add another keyframe. Shift F3 to open up your dope sheet and make sure your tube is selected, the one that we're working on right now, and it's going to be because it's selected here in the object manager. And then you can just set the interpolation to linear. So let's see what we got. Okay, so the purpose of this tube is to basically, well, I'll show you what it is. I'm going to add this material to it, and if I do a render preview on that, it's right now it's a solid block. So we want to add a Cinema 4D tag, display, and this is going to allow us to set the visibility. If we turn on visibility, we can set that to, let's say, 15%. Now if we do a render preview on that, you can see what that's doing. So that is good to go, I think. We're happy enough with that. What we could do is we could make it so that our cubes here aren't straightening out at the same time as our cubes on the outside. So what we could, actually we won't. What we'll do is we'll leave it at that, because I think this is looking pretty good. Yeah, I think it's looking pretty good. There's no point messing around with it anymore. Don't fix it if it's not broken, as they say. So last thing we need to do is, and I know I've said that 100 times, but this is actually the last thing. In Cinema 4D, we have to move into After Effects after this. But anyway, let's create a camera, make it active, go into our coordinates tab, and let's zero out the coordinates on the X and the Y, and zero out the heading, the pitch, and the banking. So we can zoom in just a little bit, bring our object a bit closer to our camera, or vice versa. That's looking pretty cool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set this up for render. So I'm just going to save this. Now you're going to have to do a file save as, because you haven't done so yet, but I already had my file saved, so I'm just saving it there. So I'm going to go into my render settings. In output, I want to set this to 1920 by 1080. And I'm going to set the frame range here to all frames. In the save option here, I want to go for a location. So I have a folder set up. I'm going to save it into this sequence folder. Call it FUI sequence. And I'm going to set the format to PNG. Let's turn on alpha channel so that we can change the background color if we want inside and After Effects. And I think that's good. Multipass, fine. Anti-aliasing is fine at geometry. So that's good to go. Let's do one last save. I'm going to render this out to picture viewer. So that's going to render away. And it's going to go pretty quickly because it's just dealing with the luminance channel. It's just 2D. It looks, well, it appears to be 2D, so it's going to render out pretty quickly. You can see we're rendering out frames here very fast. So I'm going to pause the video here. We are going to, once this is finished rendering, we're going to be jumping into After Effects and we're going to be adding the finishing touches to this. So we have reached the end of this render. It was pretty quick, just took like 3.5 minutes. So let's jump into After Effects and make sure your project tab is selected there. Double click here in this panel and we can import our rendered sequence. Let's drag this down into this composition icon here, and that's going to create a composition for us automatically, and let's see what we got. Just set this to fit. So that's looking pretty cool already as it is. So that's looping as well, I think. Yeah, that's a perfect loop. So that's awesome. That's what we're going for. So the very last thing we need to do, really, to this is, well, a couple of things. No, I think just one. Is we want to add glow. So in your effects and presets, just type in glow. Now I have this typed in already, so you just need to type it in and then you can click and drag this effect and add it onto your FUI sequence. And look at that difference it's making. I'm going to set my glow intensity to 2. And I'm going to bring the glow radius up to 20. Might go even a bit higher on the glow radius. And maybe in glow intensity I'm going to go 1 on the glow intensity. And let's bring this back to fit. See what we got. So we got a pretty cool end result on that. And all we have to do now is go to our composition menu here and go add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue. And that is that. So we have reached the end of the tutorial, guys. It took a bit longer than expected, but as always, hope you learned a lot, and I'll see you in the next video.